On February the 11th, 1929, the Lateran Pacts, accords between the Kingdom of Italy and the Holy See, were signed. They established relations between the two entities, guaranteeing, through the Constitution of the Vatican City, the Pope's total freedom and independence. We discussed this with Father Roberto Regoli, historian and professor of church history at the Pontifical Gregorian University.
Before we approach an understanding of the Lateran Pacts, what was the situation in Italy before the drafting of the Pacts?
I patti del Laterano sono una conseguenza della cosiddetta questione romana.
The Lateran Pacts are a consequence of the so-called Roman question. What happened? On September 20th, 1870, the troops of the Kingdom of Italy entered Rome, which was the Pope's last remaining territory, and the Pope of the time, Pius IX, lost all territorial power. At that point, it was understood that the Pope, under the dominion of another sovereign, could not fully exercise his prerogatives, his powers, and his relations with other states of the world. So, at the end of the First World War, the urgency of finding a solution to the Pope's independence was addressed more energetically, and the Lateran Pacts were a response to the need for papal independence shared with Italy.
Di indipendenza papale condiviso con l'Italia.
Specifically, for our audience who might not know, what are the Lateran Pacts? What do they enshrine, and why are they important in the details?
I patti del Laterano sono costituiti da tre parti.
The Lateran Pacts were constituted in three parts. First, a treaty giving an international identity to the Vatican City States. There had been the Papal States up until 1870, but with the Lateran Pacts, a new state was born, the Vatican City, whose sovereign was the Pope. Then, there was the Economic Treaty that attempted to resolve the conflicting questions between the Holy See and Italy for material goods, which the Holy See had lost in 1870, and so money would be given. There would be checks given from Italy to the Holy See. And then finally, the third part was the Concordat, that is a bilateral accord of international law between Rome and the Vatican, and the Rome of the Quirinal, the two Romes, an international treaty that sought to regulate and reciprocate relations. And these are the three aspects of the Lateran treaties.
Aspetti dei trattati del Laterano.
What does it mean for a state to welcome and recognize on its territory another state entity, especially one, moreover, that acts on the basis of a spiritual mandate? What does this entail in diplomatic terms?
Allora, sicuramente in Italia c'era già un altro Stato dentro l'Italia.
In Italy, there was already another state within the country, the Republic of San Marino, which had survived the process of Italian unification. So Italy was already used to having a state within it. But there's another difficulty with the Vatican, because it was a territory that had already been taken by Italy as a kingdom, and then it had to give it away. The agreement was to have the smallest territory possible. Pius XI, the Pope at the time, refused to have offers of a bigger territory. He refused because he was interested in having that minimum necessary to guarantee its independence. And then there's also something else in play. While the Pope was under the Italian government, it did not seem so independent. So he had to emphasize the political distance from Italy to appear independent before other nations, to all the Catholic churches in other nations. With the Lateran Pact, with a little territory, his formal independence is guaranteed, because the form also counts a lot. This would have been seen very clearly during the Second World War, because the Pope could welcome Jewish refugees, political refugees, those who dissented the fascist regime in Italy, into his little state. Those few square meters really have given him independence. Surely, as you said earlier, Italy had to concede territory, but in reality, Italy had gained from it. What has it gained? That on an international level, organized Catholicism did not protest any more against its lack of autonomy because it had an independent papal territory. Win-win, as they say. Both won.
Win-win, si dice, hanno vinto tutte e due.
Do you think that the Vatican should champion global multilateralism or strengthen its partnerships with bilateral agreements?
Allora, per il futuro il Vaticano dovrà continuare a lavorare su tutti e due i livelli.
So for the future, the Vatican must continue to work on both levels, bilateral and multilateral. You use the word global, and we can say that Catholicism is the most global international subject in the world, and the papacy is at the top of this. But Catholicism itself is global. Now, there is a new challenge that is multilateral, and for a few years now at the Holy See, the Secretariat of State has a section dedicated expressly to multilateral relations, as a necessary aspect of its religious policy. Multilateral and bilateral must go together. Surely, it must be also said that bilateral relations are never truly bilateral, because they must take into account the ensemble of relations of the greatest powers. That is, an agreement is never between the Catholic Church and a state. Yes, formally it is, but behind it there are considerations that the true powers of the movement must keep in mind, whether they like it or not, and it must be weighed. Based on that, then, they decide whether or not to proceed into an agreement.
Va pesato e in base a quello poi si decide se procedere o meno a un accordo.
Don Roberto Regoli, thank you so much.